She signed the papers before I even sat down. I was still standing near the door of the law office, holding my hat, when I heard the scratch of the pen. Claire didn't look up. The attorney nodded like this was routine, like I wasn't supposed to be part of it. No one asked if I agreed. No one explained what she was signing. Ryan leaned back in his chair, scrolling on his phone, already bored. That was the moment I understood something important had been decided without me. They thought it was finished. My name is Ethan Walker, and that signature wasn't the end of anything. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from. If you've ever stayed quiet just to keep the family from falling apart, stay with me for a minute. I didn't grow up thinking my family was broken. I just thought it was quiet. The kind of quiet you don't question when you're a kid, because it's all you know. My mum, Margaret, used to cook at the kitchen table instead of the counter, flour everywhere, recipe cards stacked with rubber bands. She wrote notes in the margins, like she was afraid the food might forget her if she didn't explain it clearly enough. That's where I learned early that details mattered. Those things written down lasted longer than promises said out loud. She believed in paper, deeds, receipts, folders labelled in her careful handwriting. People forget, she used to tell me, tapping a recipe card. Paper doesn't. After she passed, the house felt hollow in a way I couldn't explain. My dad, Frank, tried to hold things together the only way he knew how, by not talking about them. Silence was his way of coping. He went back to work the next morning like nothing had changed, and I followed his lead. Claire came into our lives a couple years later. She was organised, polite, always knew where things were. She asked questions about bills, about accounts, about paperwork my dad had never liked dealing with. At first, it felt helpful, responsible, like someone was finally steering the ship. Ryan came with her, same age as me, confidence, loud in a way that drew attention without asking for it. Adults smiled when he talked. Teachers remembered his name. I noticed early how rooms tilted toward him without anyone meaning to. It wasn't cruel at first, just uneven. At family barbecues, Ryan sat at the picnic table talking about plans. I stood by the grill flipping burgers because someone had to. When compliments went around, he sounded bigger. Mine sounded practical, useful, temporary. "You're good with your hands," my dad would say. "You'll always land on your feet." It sounded like reassurance. It didn't feel like it. One Christmas stands out more than the rest. Ryan tore into a big box and pulled out a brand new ATV. Everyone laughed. Cameras came out. I opened my gift after. The toolbox my dad said I'd get more use out of. It wasn't a bad gift. It just came with an unspoken message. This is what we expect from you. Work, not celebration. I smiled. I always smiled. I told myself it didn't matter. That was the first time I felt something settle in my chest and not move. When I was about 16, I heard Claire talking on the phone in the barn loft. I wasn't trying to listen. I was just there, fixing a hinge. She didn't know I could hear her. "He doesn't have paperwork," she said. "He doesn't have a voice in this." I didn't understand what she meant then. I only knew she wasn't talking about Ryan. The day I left for good at 18, I loaded my truck in the driveway. My dad stood on the porch. He didn't tell me to stay. He didn't tell me to go. He just watched. I waited for him to say something that would make me feel like I mattered enough to hesitate. He didn't. I drove away thinking silence meant acceptance. I didn't realize it was training me to disappear. I stayed gone longer than I meant to. Nebraska faded into a place I only visited in my head. I built my life in pieces. Trade school, late nights, busted knuckles, small wins that didn't look like much to anyone else but kept me steady. I learned how to survive without asking, how to rely on work instead of people. When my dad's health started slipping, no one asked me to come back. I just did. It felt like an obligation I'd already agreed to years ago. The house hadn't changed much. Same creak in the hallway, Same hum from the old HVAC unit that kicked on louder than it should. But the rules were different. Claire handled the mail now. Bills went straight into a locked drawer. The desk in the corner of the living room, my mum's old spot, stayed closed. Ryan came and went. Holidays, photo ops. He talked about the farm like it already belonged to him. Renovation ideas, what he'd sell, what he'd keep. He never asked me what I thought. No one did. I took my dad to appointments, sorted pills into plastic organisers, fixed what broke, paid for things quietly when insurance didn't cover it. When neighbours asked how he was doing, they looked at me, not Claire. But when decisions were made, I wasn't in the room. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," Claire would say when I asked questions. "It's all being handled." Handled by who was never clear. One night, late, I heard voices again. Claire and my dad in the kitchen, low, careful. "I don't want him fighting later," my dad said. "There won't be a fight if it's clean," she replied. I stood in the hallway, listening to my name get trimmed down to a problem to solve. I didn't step in. I told myself there'd be time. That fairness had a way of showing up eventually. A week before he died, my dad called me into the garage. He looked smaller than I remembered, tired in a way that felt permanent. "You did right by me," he said. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a promise. Just a sentence that landed and stopped. I nodded. That's what I always did. After the funeral, people told me how lucky I was to have a family like ours. Strong. Close. They didn't see the gaps, the parts that never quite lined up. When I found out my name wasn't on the will, it didn't feel shocking. It felt familiar. Like something that had been decided a long time ago, and I was just late to hear about it. I thought about my mum's recipe cards, the way she underlined things twice when they mattered, the way she believed paper could protect what words couldn't. Standing in that house, surrounded by things I'd fixed but never owned, I realised something that hit harder than the inheritance itself. I hadn't been forgotten. I'd been accounted for. The first letter came 2 weeks after the funeral. Plain envelope. Local law office. No phone call, no heads up. Inside was a notice about estate administration and a meeting date I wasn't invited to. I read it twice, slowly, like maybe I'd missed my name. I hadn't. When I asked Claire about it, she didn't look surprised. That bothered me more than anything else. "Oh, that's just formal stuff," she said, waving her hand like she was brushing crumbs off the counter. "Ryan and I are handling it. You don't need to worry." That phrase again. You don't need to worry. It sounded generous. It wasn't. A few days later, Ryan started acting like the house had already changed hands. He brought his girlfriend over. I walked through rooms pointing things out, talked about knocking down a wall between the kitchen and dining room, said it would open the place up. I stood there holding a toolbox, listening to someone redesign my childhood like it was a weekend project. "You're not planning to stay here, right?" he asked casually. Like he was asking about the weather. I didn't answer, not because I didn't have one, because I was tired of explaining my right to exist. Things began to disappear. Small things at first. Photo albums moved. My mum's old baking pan is gone from the cabinet. When I asked Claire, she said she was organising. "You always imagine things being where they used to be," she added, like memory was a flaw. One afternoon, I came home to find a realtor's card on the counter. Face down. I recognised the name. Local. Specialised in farmland. Claire said it was just an evaluation. Ryan said it was being realistic. I started sleeping lighter, listening harder, paying attention to things I'd ignored for years. The locked drawer, the way Claire angled her laptop away when I walked into the room. The mail that never seemed to include me anymore. Then the bank called. It wasn't dramatic, just a woman asking if I recognised a transfer connected to an LLC tied to one of our parcels. She sounded polite. Neutral, like she was checking a box. I told her no. She paused longer than she needed to. That night, I drove to a motel off the highway and sat on the bed staring at the wall. Not angry, focused. That was new. The next morning, Ryan finally said it out loud. "You really think you deserve the same as me?" he said, leaning against the doorframe. "For what?" It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It landed clean. That was the moment something shifted. I stopped feeling embarrassed for asking questions. I stopped worrying about keeping things calm. I called the lawyer on the letter, asked for copies, asked for dates, asked for signatures. There was a pause on the other end this time, a different kind, and for the first time since my mum died, I felt like the silence in my family wasn't something I had to carry anymore. The meeting happened without me. I found out the way I always did, after the fact. A neighbour mentioned seeing Claire's car at the attorney's office, said Ryan was there too, smiling, like something had already gone their way. When I finally sat across from Daniel Price, the lawyer, he kept his tone flat. Professional. He slid papers across the desk without commentary. The will, the addendum, dated 48 hours before my dad died. Notarized. Clean on the surface. My name wasn't there. What was there felt worse. Language that treated me like a resolved issue. A line that said I'd been provided for during the decedent's lifetime. No details, no numbers, just enough to shut a door. I asked who requested the addendum. Daniel didn't answer right away. Then he said Claire's name. On the drive back, I pulled into a grocery store parking lot and sat there longer than I should have, hands on the wheel, breathing slowly. This wasn't confusion anymore. It was designed. When I got home, the desk drawer was locked tighter than before. I didn't force it. I didn't confront anyone. I started keeping notes instead. Dates, times, conversations that felt off. A week later, another bank notice came. This one flagged. Funds moved between accounts tied to land my mum had owned before Claire ever showed up. The name on the LLC wasn't Ryan's. It was Claire's cousin's, a name I recognised from holidays, someone who smiled too much and never stayed long. I went back through old files in the garage, boxes no one had touched in years. That's where I found my mum's handwriting again, faded folders, a copy of her original will. Pre-marriage, clear, specific. My name is underlined twice. I didn't feel relieved. I felt steady. When I mentioned the document to Claire, her face tightened just enough to notice. She told me I was confusing old intentions with reality, that people changed, that my dad had made his choices. "You should be grateful for what you got," she said. Ryan was less careful. "You were never really part of this," he snapped one night in the kitchen. "You just happened to be born here." That was it. The sentence that cut through everything I'd been carrying. I told them I wasn't here for money. I told them I was here for my name. After that, the tone changed. Claire stopped talking to me unless witnesses were around. Ryan stopped pretending I was invisible and started treating me like a threat. Daniel Price returned my calls faster. The house felt colder, quieter, like everyone was waiting for the next move. So was I. Because once you see the pattern, once you understand how you've been positioned, there's no going back to pretending it's an accident. And they didn't realise yet that by trying to erase me cleanly, they'd left fingerprints all over the paper. The lawyer's office smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet, the kind of place where time slowed down on purpose. Beige walls, a clock that ticked louder than it should have. I took the chair closest to the door without thinking. Habit. Claire sat across from me, hands folded, posture calm. Ryan leaned back like this was already over. Daniel Price cleared his throat and began reading, even though we'd all seen the paperwork by then. When he reached the part where my name should have been, the room went quiet. Not awkward. Final. I waited longer than I needed to before speaking. "That's not what he told me," I said. Claire didn't look at me. Ryan laughed once, short and sharp. Daniel paused, looked up. "Mr. Walker," he said carefully, "do you have something you'd like to submit?" I reached into my bag and set the first folder on the table. My mum's will, pre-marriage, original language intact, beneficiary lines unaltered. Daniel's eyes narrowed as he flipped through it. "That document was never part of probate," Claire said quickly. Too quickly. "No," I said. "It was locked away." I placed the second folder down. Bank statements, transfers flagged, LLC connections highlighted, dates circled, not accusations. Just records. Ryan sat forward now. Daniel leaned back in his chair. He didn't say anything for a long moment. That silence did more work than any argument could have. "There's also a recording," I added, not threatening, informational. Claire finally looked at me, really looked. The mask slipped. "That was a private conversation," she said. "It was my name," I replied. "That makes it relevant." Daniel asked to hear it. I didn't press play. I didn't need to. I just let the possibility sit there, the consequences, the questions it would raise about influence, about timing, about intent. This wasn't about winning in the room. It was about making the room understand that the story wasn't finished. Ryan stood up. "You're doing this over hurt feelings," he said. "You don't belong here." I met his eyes, calm, even. "I've belonged here longer than any of this paperwork," I said. "And you know it." Daniel closed the file slowly. "We're going to need time," he said. "And transparency." Claire's hands tightened. Just enough. I stood. I didn't ask for anything. I didn't make demands. I let the weight of what I'd placed on the table speak for itself. As I walked out, no one followed me. No one called my name. They sat there with their clean documents and their careful plans, realizing for the first time that the quiet one had been paying attention. And that the will they thought ended the story was just the first page. I didn't go back to the house that night. I drove until the road thinned out and the radio lost its signal. Pulled over, sat with the engine off. Let the quiet settle in a way it never had before. For years, silence had meant surrender. That night, it felt like control. I laid everything out on the motel desk, folders, notes, dates, names, not to relive it, to see it clearly. There was a pattern now, a clean one. Decisions made behind closed doors, paper moved faster than people, authority assumed instead of earned. I wasn't angry the way people expect. I wasn't plotting some dramatic takedown. I was deciding what I was no longer willing to absorb. There were options. Contest the will. Force a forensic review. Let the bank follow the trail they'd already flagged. None of it would be quick. All of it would be public in ways Claire worked hard to avoid. The recording stayed in my pocket. So did the original copy of my mum's will. Not as leverage, as anchors. Proof that I wasn't imagining things, that I hadn't misremembered my place. They thought paper could erase me. Paper was exactly what tied them together. I called Daniel the next morning, asked him to document everything. No accusations. Just facts. I told him I wanted transparency, not apologies. He didn't argue. When I finally went back to the house, the air felt different, like a space waiting to be claimed or abandoned. I didn't know which yet. What I did know was this. I wasn't here to punish anyone. I was here to stop protecting people who never protected me. They still believed I'd fold, that I'd take whatever was offered and disappear again. I let them believe it. Sometimes the quiet isn't absent, it's preparation. A few days after everything was signed and stamped, I found myself sitting alone at a small kitchen table in a rental I barely noticed when I booked it. The coffee had gone cold. My shoulders felt tight, like I'd been bracing for impact for too long and forgot how to stand down. On paper, I'd won something. In my body, it felt more like I'd stopped bleeding. I went back to the house early one morning. Not because I was ready, because I didn't want to fear deciding the timing anymore. The door opened easily. The HVAC hummed like it always had. Light slipped through the blinds in thin, careful lines. I walked slowly, like a guest who knew he shouldn't rearrange anything yet. Legally, it was mine. Emotionally, it still felt borrowed. I went straight to the barn. That space made more sense to me than the rest of the house. The smell of oil and old wood hit first. Familiar. Grounding. I opened a drawer beneath the workbench and found a single recipe card folded twice over. My mum's handwriting. Cornbread. Stained at the corners. Worn thin. She'd protected the memory. She just hadn't been able to protect me when it mattered. I stood there holding it longer than I planned to. Lena showed up later that afternoon. She hovered by the door like she wasn't sure she was allowed to step inside anymore. Her apology came out uneven. She said she didn't know how to stop things, that staying quiet felt safer at the time. I believed her. I didn't forgive her either, not yet. I told her I heard her. That was enough for that day. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It came in small, practical decisions. I changed the locks on the barn, left the house untouched, cleaned out one drawer and closed another. I chose to keep one corner of the kitchen exactly the same. Scratches, stains, all of it. Control, I learned, wasn't about erasing the past. It was about deciding what stayed. There are nights when I think about what I'd trade to hear my dad choose me out loud while he was still alive. I'd give up the land for that, every acre. But I don't get to rewrite his choices. I only get to decide what I accept now, and I'm not invisible anymore. I'm paying attention. If you've ever felt like the extra one in your own family, hit subscribe. This story isn't really about land or money. It's about what people do when they think you won't push back. Share this with someone who got burned by family decisions, and tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. I read every story, and sometimes the next one starts there.